You're listening to All Things Considered from NPR News.
And this is WNYC coming up. It's another hour of All Things Considered, and later WNYC's Thursday evening lineup begins at 8 with Studio 360, which considers how pregnancy and motherhood are suddenly becoming big themes in science fiction. Then it's Snap Judgment. You can plan, you can save, but sometimes the biggest decisions in life are decided by chance. It's our Thursday evening lineup. It starts tonight at 8 on 93.9 FM WNYC. Tonight we have a chance of showers, a slight chance of showers, or possibly even a thunderstorm before 11 o'clock. Otherwise mostly cloudy with a low around 58 degrees. Tomorrow mostly sunny with a high near 71. Currently it's 62 degrees and partly cloudy at 5 o'clock.
Support for NPR comes from WNYC members and from Stars, presenting the new Stars original series, Vida, following the Hernandez sisters as they return home to East LA and learn the surprising truth about their mother. Vida is available now on the Stars app. Atlassian, provider of collaboration software for organizations of all sizes. Through products like Jira Software, Confluence, Trello, and Stride, teams can plan, track, and communicate. More at Atlassian.com. And Subaru, committed to doing its part to make the world a better place by supporting philanthropic initiatives in local communities. Learn more at Subaru.com/lovepromise. Love, it's what makes a Subaru a Subaru.
This is WNYC FM, HD and AM, New York.
President Trump tweeted today that the highly anticipated meeting with Kim Jong-un will take place in the city-state of Singapore on June 12th. I'm Jamie Floyd. This is All Things Considered on WNYC. 3 Americans who were held in North Korea landed on U.S. soil overnight.
It was an emotional time for these Korean Americans who had been in jail in North Korea with very little prospect of getting released.
Complete coverage of the North Korean release is coming right up. Plus, more than 100 former ambassadors have signed a letter opposing Gina Haspel's nomination to be director of the CIA. And strange unordered packages are showing up on doorsteps across the country. Our Planet Money team tries to get to the bottom of it after news headlines.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Windsor Johnston. A new report from the Pentagon says a wide range of military failures contributed to the deadly ambush of 4 American soldiers in Niger last year. The investigation cites individual, organizational, and institutional failures in the attack. General Tom Waldhauser heads the U.S. Africa Command. He says the military is changing the way it conducts operations in Africa.
We are now far more prudent in our missions. The missions that we actually accompany on have to have some type of strategic value in terms of the enemy we're going against. Do they have a strategic threat to the United States?
The 4 Americans were part of a U.S. contingent that's been assisting Niger's military since 2013 in a battle against extremists linked to the Islamic State. President Trump is making his way to northern Indiana for a campaign rally this evening. Jennifer Weingart of member station WBPE reports Trump's supporters started showing up early.
Inside Northside Middle School, setup and security sweeps are going on. Outside, people are lined up around the block, decked out in Trump flags, Trump scarves, and Make America Great Again hats. Bruce Spratling is wearing a Trump flag as a cape. He says support for Trump is how he chooses who to vote for.
I only have one question I want to ask anyone running for Senate or the House, and that is, will you support President Trump unconditionally? I don't want anyone with ideas. We've got enough ideas. All I want is someone that's going to support Mr. Trump.
Spratling has been out since 9 a.m., though the rally doesn't start until 7. He's got plenty of like-minded people out here to talk with. For NPR News, I'm Jennifer Weingart in Elkhart, Indiana.
The leader of the Islamist group Hamas in Gaza is suggesting he would support masses of Palestinians crossing the border fence into Israel in what's expected to be the large culmination of ongoing border protests. NPR's Daniel Estrin reports from Gaza City.
Yahya Sinwar was named the leader of Hamas in Gaza last year. He gave his first press conference with the International Press Corps days before Palestinians hold final demonstrations on the Israeli border next week. Palestinian officials say Israeli troops have killed at least 47 Palestinians in the protests. Critics accuse Israel of excessive force. Israel says it's acted out of concern that Palestinians would breach the border fence. The Hamas leader told reporters, "What's the problem with hundreds of thousands breaking through?" He said protesters would not be armed. The Hamas leader says he wants protests to pressure Israel to ease a blockade imposed since the militant group, an enemy of Israel, came to power in Gaza a decade ago. Daniel Estrin, NPR News, Gaza City.
The Trump administration is moving forward with plans for an upcoming summit between the U.S. and North Korea. The president announced today the meeting will take place in Singapore on June 12th. On Wall Street, the Dow was up 196 points. This is NPR News.
And you're listening to WNYC in New York. I'm Jamie Floyd. President Trump has nominated 7 people to serve as federal trial judges in New York. Michael McEnoney, a congressional reporter for Law 360, says the nominees come from the public and private sector. And he says Senator Chuck Schumer collaborated with the White House to vet the nominees.
Although Senator Schumer and the president have disagreed on a lot of policy areas, so far they've worked together fairly well on things like judicial nominations. They previously worked together on a Second Circuit nominee who both the White House and Senator Schumer were happy with.
Some of the judicial vacancies have been open since 2015, but McEnoney says congressional Republicans have been moving quickly to approve nominees since Trump took office. A majority of New Jersey voters support Governor Phil Murphy's plan to raise taxes on millionaires. That's according to a new public opinion poll by the think tank New Jersey Policy Perspective. Policy analyst Sheila Ratnurtson says the tax hike could help add revenue the state lost during the Christie years. He cut billions worth of taxes on corporations. She says it could also help counteract the federal tax overhaul.
And New Jersey corporations are now collectively enjoying over $2.9 billion a year in tax cuts. With that kind of windfall, there's never been a better time to reform the state's tax code.
The organization polled 600 likely voters and found 70% support the measure. And the Cronut turns 5 years old today. People are still lining up at the Soho bakery that makes the fried confection. Raquel Robles from Los Angeles spent 20 minutes in line at Dominique Ansel waiting for a taste.
Very thick, really sweet. It was a lot to handle in my mouth. There's like a filling in there that I was not expecting. Very sweet. A little too sweet for me.
A representative for the bakery says it still sells out every day by mid-morning and you can still only buy 2 at a time. Tonight, thunderstorms possible. Currently 62 degrees, mostly cloudy.
Support for NPR comes from Rock Auto, an online auto parts store shipping parts directly to customers worldwide. Everything from complex sensors to new carpet. More at rockauto.com.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Audie Cornish.
And I'm Mary Louise Kelly. We now have a win and a where for the summit between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Those details arrived, as does a lot of news these days, via the president's Twitter account. The location, he tweeted, will be Singapore. The date, June 12th. Much of the diplomacy between now and then will fall to Mike Pompeo. That would be Trump's new Secretary of State. Pompeo has already flown to Pyongyang and back this week. His plane touched down at Joint Base Andrews, just outside Washington, a little before 3 this morning. Also arriving home, 3 American detainees whose release he helped secure from North Korea, and 2 reporters who had been invited along for the ride. One of those reporters is Matthew Lee of the Associated Press, and he is in our studio now. Welcome home, by the way. Have you gotten any sleep at all?
None. It's been a relatively, certainly horizontal sleep-free 4 days.
A lot of plane sleeping going on. Well, describe the scene this morning at Andrews. The president showed up, the first lady showed up, the vice president showed up. You just filed your report on that, and you described it as a really carefully choreographed scene.
It certainly was. It was quite a show, and it was an emotional time, clearly, for these 3 Korean Americans who had been in jail in North Korea with very little prospect of getting released.
One of them commenting he was just excited to see daylight.
Precisely.
He hadn't seen it in so long.
Yes, I mean, there are few worse places to be than being held in a North Korean prison or labor camp, as these guys were.
Were you given any access to these 3 detainees? Were you able to interview them?
No, the State Department was very careful about wanting to sequester them in a space that was blocked off by curtains, and so we couldn't see them on the plane. And the intention was for them to spend time with the medical personnel, including a psychiatrist for any PTSD issues, in this small cabin-type area aboard Secretary Pompeo's plane.
So more details that may emerge as these 3 are debriefed. I want to ask you, Matt Lee, this is not your first time traveling to North Korea, not your first time traveling there with the U.S. Secretary of State. You went along on the plane with Madeleine Albright when she traveled in 2000, and I'm curious what differences you saw.
The whole feel of this trip, it was very secret. No one was supposed to know about it, although there was rampant speculation that it was going to happen. It was very low-key compared to the Albright trip of 18 years ago, which had been, a big thing. This time, we got off the plane. Secretary Pompeo was greeted by some North Korean dignitaries. We got into a motorcade that was quite interesting. It was a Mercedes limousine that Secretary Pompeo got into. Myself and Carol Morello of the Washington Post and some of the staff got into a Chevy van, which, interestingly enough, had a name called the American Road. We tried to ask our driver what exactly that meant, but our questions went unanswered.
And as you're driving by in your Chevy, what do you see out the window? What's it look like?
We arrived early in the morning, like what would be rush hour in a normal city. There was more traffic than certainly there was 18 years ago, but still, we're talking very, very little. Most of the morning commuters that we saw were either on bicycles or on foot. Farmers, soldiers, people who are potentially office workers, and lots of children in school uniforms walking to school along the side of the road. The city, from what I remember from 18 years ago, was not a sprawling metropolis of skyscraper-type buildings. That has changed.
Suggests money is coming in from somewhere to pay for that.
Exactly. Despite the maximum pressure campaign of the Trump administration, which is only, a year old, but previous U.S. administrations, the George W. Bush administration and the Obama administration, had both imposed severe sanctions on North Korea, and yet the city is still growing up and out.
Was it a done deal, a fait accompli, when Secretary Pompeo arrived in Pyongyang, that these detainees would be coming back home with y'all?
I think it's fair to say that they expected, yes. They were very hopeful, yes. But of all the unpredictable countries in the world, North Korea is perhaps the most unpredictable. So nothing was 100% certain. Even after Pompeo's 90-minute meeting with Kim Jong-un, when he came back to the hotel, we went up to him in the lobby and said, how do things look for the Americans? And he couldn't give a 100% answer. He had his fingers crossed.
Really?
And it wasn't until about 10 or 15 minutes later when Kim Jong-un sent an emissary to the hotel that they knew we were going to be going home with these 3 men.
Matthew Lee, diplomatic writer for the Associated Press, just back off the plane from Pyongyang. Matt Lee, thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, I want to bring into the conversation the last top U.S. official to travel to North Korea and bring home American detainees. That would be James Clapper. In 2014, when he was Director of National Intelligence, General Clapper flew to Pyongyang and secured the release of Kenneth Bae and Matthew Miller. And General Clapper is with us now. General Clapper, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
What is your take on today's news? These 3 detainees landing back on U.S. soil. I guess my specific question is how much credit is due to the Trump administration for negotiating that release?
Well, first, it's a great thing, no matter who does it. As Americans, we should all rejoice. So, due credit to the administration, and particularly, I think, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo for pulling this off.
How do you read North Korea's motives? Do you see this as a genuine gesture of goodwill?
Well, I think it is for now. I think it is somewhat transactional in that, in the interest of having a summit, which which itself is a huge concession to the North Koreans. Releasing those 3 citizens almost had to be done to kind of clear the deck. And this, of course, consummates a standard North Korean technique, which is have a small stable of American hostages that you can use as chips at convenient times, and I think that's the case here.
We mentioned President Trump was at Andrews this morning, and a reporter asked him why he thought Kim Jong-un was releasing these prisoners now. Here's what the president said.
I think he did this because I really think he wants to do something and bring that country into the real world. I really believe that, John, and I think that we're going to have a success.
General Clapper, what do you think?
Well, I don't actually disagree with that, but I do think, at least from my standpoint, useful to think about what was the motivation. And I ascribe 2 major reasons. One, I believe the North Koreans have achieved whatever they thought they needed to achieve in the way of a nuclear capability, so that they feel that they have deterrence. The reason that's important is when they do enter into negotiations with us, this time they will not be as a supplicant. They will feel on a more co-equal basis. The other thing is, I think that a lot of credit needs to go to President Moon of the Republic of Korea, who may be...
South Korea.
South Korea, Republic of Korea, may be the most astute president that they've ever had. And he managed his account, so to speak, up north, capitalized on the intense desire of the North Koreans to be included in the Winter Olympics. And I think he's similarly managed the account with the United States.
This is interesting because you're describing 2 very key dynamics that have changed in the 4 years since you were in North Korea negotiating with that regime. One being change of leadership in South Korea, and the other being Kim Jong-un now sees himself as an equal, a nuclear power sitting down with another nuclear power at the negotiating table.
Right. When I was there, the first White House issued talking point that I was to recite to the North Koreans was, you must denuclearize. Well, they were hard over about they weren't going to do that. So it'd be very interesting to see what price they wish to extract to assuage their willingness to denuclearize.
Do you think then that it is a realistic possibility that the Korean Peninsula would be denuclearized as a result of this summit and ongoing diplomatic contact? I'll play one more piece of tape from the president this morning. He was asked whether securing the release of these detainees was his proudest achievement, and here's what he said.
My proudest achievement will be, this is a part of it, but will be when we denuclearize that entire peninsula. This is what people have been waiting for a long time. Nobody thought we could be on this track in terms of speed.
The president there speaking very optimistically about this as a real prospect.
Well, I admire his optimism, and I hope it works out that way. What's not clear to me is what our own strategy is. I mean, the obvious thing the North Koreans could ask is that we leave the peninsula. I don't know.
Meaning get U.S. forces out of South Korea. There's about 28,000 U.S. forces there.
Exactly, and we've had forces there for 68 years. And of course, the problem with that is that this has huge regional implications.
Well, so as somebody who's actually sat down with the North Koreans, any advice to the U.S. team in the run-up to June 12th?
Well, the North Koreans will have done their homework. They are very rational about this, and they are pretty good debaters. And for the most part, the exchanges I had with them were pretty nasty. But the one point that I brought up that seemed to resonate with them was, you know, the United States has no permanent enemies. And I cited my own personal experience having been in Vietnam in 1965 and 66, and it was 47 years later that I went back. A country we once fought, we have diplomatic relations with, we have economic relations with, we have military relations with. And so could it be with the DPRK, the formal name for North Korea. And that's the one point I made where I didn't get kind of a finger in the chest kind of response, which is the case with just about everything else I said.
General Clapper, appreciate your time.
Thank you.
That is former Director of National Intelligence, General James Clapper.
listening to All Things Considered on WNYC. The Trump administration has terminated temporary protected status for Hondurans, meaning that some 600,000 people face deportation back to Honduras. Coming up next, we'll speak with one deportee about what returnees will face when they try to reintegrate. Also ahead, a conversation with WNYC's Robert Lewis about the criminal investigation into former State Attorney General Eric Schneiderman. That's next. Stay tuned.
WNYC supporters include the Broadway debut of The Boys in the Band, starring Jim Parsons, Zachary Quinto, Matt Bomer, and Andrew Reynolds. Limited Broadway engagement for 15 weeks. Tickets at boysintheband.com. Support for the Green Space, WNYC's street-level state-of-the-art events venue and broadcast studio at 44 Charlton Street is provided by the Jerome L. Green Foundation.
I'm Stephen Dubner on the next Freakonomics Radio, reimagining the role of nurses.
The evidence seems to be that increasing accessibility is actually getting better outcomes.
And the political and regulatory hurdles that stand in the way.
It's like putting the mafia in charge of the police department.
That's next time on Freakonomics Radio. Saturday afternoon at 4 on 93.9 FM WNYC.
Donald Trump has called himself the king of debt. He says he loves to play with other people's money, but the facts suggest something else. Tomorrow Morning Edition, hear why Donald Trump paid cash for golf courses and mansions around the world. Join us for that and the information you need to start your day tomorrow on the Morning Edition right here on WNYC. Tonight we've got a slight chance of showers and thunderstorms, and otherwise it will be mostly cloudy, then gradually become mostly clear with a low around 58 degrees. Tomorrow, Friday, mostly sunny with highs in the mid-70s. And looking ahead to the weekend, Saturday, showers and thunderstorms, and otherwise cloudy with a high near 71. Sunday, for Mother's Day, a 50% chance of showers, highs near 65. Currently at 62 degrees, mostly cloudy in Central Park at 5:20.
Support for NPR comes from member stations and from Farmers Insurance, committed to helping people understand the ins and outs of insurance so they can prepare for life's ups and downs. Coverage options and more information can be found at farmers.com. And Exact Sciences, offering Cologuard for average-risk adults over 50, a non-invasive colon cancer screening test that can be used at home by prescription only. Information at cologuardtest.com.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Mary Louise Kelly.
And I'm Audie Cornish. The U.S. government is telling roughly 60,000 Honduran immigrants who have been in the U.S. for nearly 2 decades to wrap up their affairs here and head home. They've been here legally since 1999 after a hurricane struck their country, but the Trump administration last week terminated temporary protected status for Hondurans. That means these immigrants will be subject to deportation starting in January of 2020. NPR's Jason Beaubien was just in Honduras and spoke to a deportee about what those who return could face.
U.S. immigration officials view Harold James Tatum as a Honduran, but Tatum views himself as a New Yorker. Selling jewelry near the beach in Tela on Honduras' Caribbean coast, Tatum is listening to a live stream on his favorite New York radio station, 77 WABC. Tatum was deported back to Honduras 18 years ago at the age of 39, but he said he's never really gotten used to it.
Yeah, I don't even know the national anthem of this country, so, you know, I feel like I'm more American than I am Honduranian, because everything that I do is American.
Tatum left Honduras with his family when he was 6. He grew up in New York City and says all his habits are from the U.S.
The way I eat, the stuff I buy to eat, the movies I watch, the music I listen to, it's like, it's tattooed in me to be an American.
But after getting convicted of selling drugs in the mid-1990s and serving 5 years in prison, Tatum lost his legal residency in the U.S. and got shipped down here to the country of his birth.
Well, I find it hard because there's no jobs here. And the ones that do have jobs, they're not leaving their jobs to let somebody else fill in for them, you know?
He worked for a while in the kitchen of a hotel, making $6 a day plus a plate of food. Then he got a job recruiting tourists to go on boat tours at the harbor, but none of those gigs lasted. Now he sells bracelets and necklaces by the beach.
Actually, I'm surviving through my brothers and sisters, which they help me out. They send me money every month, pay my rent. send money for food and other expenses.
The end of temporary protected status for Hondurans means that tens of thousands of additional deportees could soon be following in Tatum's footsteps. And this could have a huge impact on the Central American country. Honduras is the second poorest nation in the Americas, ahead of Haiti. Hondurans living in the U.S. are a major source of revenue for the country. In 2016, they sent $3.4 billion from the U.S. back home to family and friends. Dana Frank, a professor at the University of California, Santa Cruz, who's written extensively about Honduras, says there's no way the country can absorb tens of thousands of returnees.
I think there's almost no work available. I know hardworking, able-bodied people who love to work that haven't been able to find jobs for 10 years.
Of 57,000 Hondurans registered for TPS, just over 50,000 U.S. born children may also end up going back to Honduras.
It's not that these people are going to have a hard time getting by. They are not going to be able to get by.
The minimum wage is just over $1 an hour. Two largest cities, Tegucigalpa and San Pedro Sula, are ranked among the most violent places in the world. Behind this display of jewelry in Tela, Tatum says for someone who's used to the U.S. lifestyle, Honduras would be a shock. That's how he's felt. Jason Bovia, NPR News.
Listening to All Things Considered on WNYC, I'm Jamie Fuller. The criminal investigation into former State Attorney General Eric Schneiderman is moving forward. That's after a new report released late Monday revealed allegations of physical abuse and intimidation by four women. In a show on Monday today, Governor Cuomo joined District Attorney to say WNYC's Robert Cruz was there in hearing on behalf of the report. So yesterday, Governor Cuomo announced that he's leaving the Nassau County District Attorney, Manuel Sigas, and the special prosecutor to handle this investigation and any possible obstruction.
Well, Siga says it's too early to talk about but she says there are a number of domestic violence-related charges that they can pursue depending on the evidence. Harassment, kidnapping, strangulation. They're also looking at Siga is also going to look at issues regarding statute of limitations, misdemeanors and misdemeanors. She could run for damage and trial.
To make this case the same, whether the alleged perpetrator is a worker or a CEO or the former Attorney General of the state.
Weeks ago, after my mother raised the question of Vance's office and the allegation against her fiancé, so now Cuomo basically said this week it will look bad if the Manhattan PA were to investigate the AG's office. That's why he appointed the special prosecutor. In response, Vance wrote a letter to the governor almost questioning the legality of the move and also drawing parallels with perceived executive overreach on the federal level where President Trump has gotten criticism for allegedly trying to politicize the DOJ. That prompted a blistering response from the governor's office saying Vance's own actions led to distrust from women's organizations. So it was ugly.
Did they take the opportunity today to make peace?
Largely, Cuomo praised the Manhattan DA's office.
Sorry, Vance has done a magnificent job. I have total confidence in him and in the office.
But he also says perception matters.